Joining us now, Democratic Senator Ben Nelson of Nebraska, Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, and Republican Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah. Gentlemen, I want to begin with the interview we just heard. The challenger in the Afghan presidential election, pretty sober assessment. Abdullah clearly has a bias against President Karzai. He's running against him in the election. But to you first, Senator Brown, does he have a point? His main point, as President Obama decides whether to send thousands more troops, and the White House says the question is, do we have a credible partner? Is there any reason to believe another Karzai term would end the inefficiency, end the corruption, end the delays in getting the Afghan police and army up to speed?
Well, I was in Afghanistan about a month ago. In fact, literally a couple of days after the election, met with Dr. Abdullah, met with President Karzai. The ambassador, all of us are very concerned about corruption in that government. That's why, as Dr. Abdullah pointed out, it's been 8 years of mismanagement with President Karzai. There have been and 8 years of loss of focus from the Americans as we put all of our efforts, the previous administration put all of its efforts into Iraq. So those questions remain to be answered. That's why the president needs time in making this decision. The president's going to watch on how this election is conducted. We know there was massive fraud in the first election. This runoff, we hope, is significantly better. I think international observers have learned some things, but it's frankly too early to tell. But that's why the president needs the time he's taking, listening to advisors, talking to Abdullah and Karzai, and all that he needs to do to make this decision in the most sobering way possible.
But Senator Nelson, in a perfect world, or a close to perfect world, let's assume the election goes well and there is significantly less fraud. The question is, would a new Karzai term bring a new Karzai? And if not, and if you have more corruption and what most people believe just incompetence, getting the Afghan army and the Afghan police up to speed, there's a high attrition rate, is it worth the risks of American lives to send 10, 20, maybe 40,000 more troops?
Well, I think that's a serious question that has to be answered. I don't think we're going to know until the election occurs. But I think we should start off with the premise that when the Afghan people speak without fraud in the election, that will establish some legitimacy for the Karzai administration. I think we have to continue to work with them, that administration, to root out all that corruption and help them bring about an efficient government in the delivery of the services to the people as well as the security. This has to be a partnership. There's no question about it. When we have that many American troops stationed there, fighting there, and unfortunately dying there.
Senator Hatch, this might sound like an odd question, but does it matter who the government of Afghanistan is, whether the government of Afghanistan is corrupt or not? If the enemy is the Taliban and al-Qaeda, is the mission of the United States, almost despite the failings of the Afghan government, to do the mission?
Well, actually, we have to worry about corruption, but we also have to work with whoever is put in there, and whoever is put in there, you're going to find some corruption. The fact of the matter is, I think we ought to rely on the handpicked general by President Obama, General McChrystal, who said that we've got to have more troops there. At the height of our counterinsurgency in Iraq, we had 150,000 troops. Here, we have 68,000 troops. And even Great Britain and England admitted that they had to do more because they increased their troops by 5%. Now, they're not as large a group as ours naturally, but the fact of the matter is, if we don't support the General McChrystal, and in the end the President, I understand why these are tough decisions, but I think it's taken too long, and some people have even been, I think, hypercritical in suggesting that he's waiting till after this election because they have some tough governorships up for election. I hope that's not the case.
Well, let's follow up on that point. Senator Brown says he needs this time. Senator Hatch says it's time to make this decision. Let me add in here, you're all familiar with this, the former Vice President Dick Cheney, a scathing review of the current Commander-in-Chief, President Obama, in a speech last week, saying that he's not being decisive. In fact, Mr. Cheney says he's dithering. Let's listen.
Having announced his Afghanistan strategy in March, President Obama now seems afraid to make a decision and unable to provide his commander on the ground with the troops he needs to complete the mission. The White House must stop dithering while America's armed forces are in danger.
Senator Hatch, you just said you thought it was time to make the decision. Do you go as far as the former Vice President? Is our Commander-in-Chief dithering?
Well, I would never want to call my president dithering, and I know it's a tough position that he's in, but why not follow the advice of all of his generals, and especially General McChrystal? He handpicked him, and McChrystal's one of the best there is. He and Petraeus set up, they're the masters of counterinsurgency. They need these troops, there's no question about it, and we're exposing our young men and women over there, a number of whom have been killed. I'm not blaming the president for that, but we're exposing them without the proper help that they've just got to have. And I think it's a mistake to continue to just not make this decision when you have the best people on the ground who are living with that problem every day, saying we got to have more people over here if we want a counterinsurgency that's going to work. And when you've had some progress, like in the Helmand River Valley, where they went in there. That was a huge Taliban stronghold. We went in there, did counterinsurgency. Today, the people are happy. They're raising crops. We're building roads. The Taliban are no longer there. And we could do that throughout that country if we would follow the advice of the generals who are right there on the ground, risking their lives and risking our young men and women's lives over there.
Senator Brown, Senator Hatch just put on the table the prospect that maybe the Commander-in-Chief is delaying this decision until after some very tough elections a week from Tuesday in this country. You believe there's any possibility of that?
I think that's outrageous to claim that the President of the United States, and I know Senator Hatch didn't exactly claim it. He said some others claim it, but pointed out nonetheless, it's outrageous that any partisan, that partisans in this country would say the President of the United States is waiting on two governor's races in New Jersey and in Virginia to make a decision in Afghanistan. Look, to listen to Dick Cheney, who was the mastermind of the most failed decade of foreign policy that this country's had at least in my political lifetime, perhaps my whole lifetime, perhaps my parents' lifetime too. I mean, to listen to him when he talked about dithering, when their mistake was to attack Iraq and lose sight of Afghanistan. His President Abdullah, his Dr. Abdullah, presidential candidate Abdullah said that 8 years of failure of Karzai implicitly is also 8 years of failure of dithering by that administration. So just take Dick Cheney's advice off the table. But one thing that's important, Secretary Gates, the Secretary of Defense, has gone to Slovenia to meet with defense ministers of NATO countries. We want to do this right. We should move deliberatively. We should move in a way that the president is doing by making this decision the right way. We want to line up our NATO allies, which we have not been able to do for most of this decade, before we make this decision. The president's doing it right. I think waiting till not the Virginia and New Jersey election, but waiting to the election in Kabul and in the Helmand province and in Kandahar is the right way to go.
Let me shift subjects, gentlemen. I want to discuss health care in our next block, but before we take a quick break, I want to discuss this story. This is the front page of Senator Hatch's paper this morning in Salt Lake. Thousands seek H1N1 vaccine. Stories like this are on front pages all across the country. I want to ask you, each of you, and start with you, Senator Nelson, about the government's preparations here. They ordered 30 million doses. They're now behind in getting them ready. Does it alarm you? Does it say something about the state of our government preparedness to react when the government itself said this is a big deal? And they said we are going to rush these vaccines, but in each of your states, they don't have what they ordered, and it could be some time.
Well, I think everybody's concerned about making certain that the vaccines arrive in the states. I don't know that it says as much about the government as it says about the size of the challenge that's there for the government. That once you say, let's go, there's still a lag of time that you're going to experience. So I think they're making every move possible. I'm not hearing a lot of criticism about the government's role in this. I think it's a better indication that this is a monumental challenge, and the monumental challenge is being met. It's just there's just a longer period of time associated with it than anybody might have expected. That's nothing unusual about delays. It's just unfortunate given the fact that this is so critically important to get the vaccine to the young people and the older people as soon as possible. And I know they're doing everything that they possibly can.
You share that assessment, Senator Hatch? They're doing everything they can?
Well, I think they really are. And look, it's a terrible problem. We have a lot of problems right out here in Utah, and we're very concerned about it. A lot of people are afraid to take the vaccine because of the lack of knowledge about it. But I think the government is doing everything they possibly can, and Centers for Disease Control. It doesn't appear to be as virulent as they thought it was, but we have a number of cases here in Utah that have been pretty serious.